So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you in the world you are. It's a great pleasure for me. My name is Mario Martone. I'm a theoretical physicist, research assistant professor at the Simon Center for the Mathematics and Geometry and Physics in New York, USA. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce this incredible panel. So let me start with my presentation right away. It'll be a few slides before we get to the meat and our great panelists. So as I said, the name of the webinar, you probably know, it's Energizing Science in Palestine, Building a Technology of Innovation Ecosystem in the West Bank. So the organization that is sponsoring this event is Scientists for Palestine, of whom I am a founder and one of the leaders of. Scientists for Palestine was funded in 2015 by a collective of initially theoretical physicists, but it's now expanded to over 100 members of people with expertise in all the sciences, with the mission of promoting science and support the integrations of the Palestinian scientific communities in the international scientific community. So what does Scientists for Palestine do? We do a lot of things, including, of course, type of webinars like this one. But our main things are what we call Palestinian Advanced Physics Schools. The reasons why it's only physics is only because of our history. We really want to expand beyond physics. And those were incredibly successful schools that we have organized with advanced undergrads and master's students in Palestine. We have a 2016 edition in Arab American University in the West Bank, the 2017 and 2019 with the Bersay, and we're actually planning. There was one for 2020 that was obviously canceled because of COVID, but we're planning one in 2021. So this is incredible. It's been incredibly great for us to be able to bring, very prominent scientists to teach Palestinian students various topics in physics at the moment. We've also organized international meetings of science in Palestine. Some of our speakers were part of this. We had one at the University of Cambridge in 2018 in January, another second one in November in 2018 at Columbia University in New York, and then a large one in January 2020 at MIT and at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That was an amazing 3 days in which the math department has hosted over 200 people discussing science in Palestine, and we had an historic delegation of 9 colleagues from the West Bank to fly into Boston. If you're interested, I really invite you to go on the website and see more about it. Well, our long-term goals are large. We want to continue the webinar series, exploit the online platforms to discuss various topics of interest, build mentorship and exchange programs, scholarship programs, building business and innovation and entrepreneurship programs. This is particularly relevant for this particular webinar. And then much more, just being a catalyst for integrating Palestine and overcoming the difficulties that have impeded the scientific community in Palestine to really flourish. One of these differences, we'll talk more about it, and this is the only real content of my introduction. I want to remind everybody of the case of Imad Barghouti. He's a great colleague of ours and personal friend of mine. We think it's important to keep the story in our mind. He's a professor of astrophysics, one of the most prominent physicists in Palestine. He's a professor at Al-Quds University, very close to Jerusalem in the West Bank. He was arrested on July 16, 2020. And his story is it's very disturbing. In many ways, it's unfortunately an example of the complications that really make Palestine a unique case. In fact, he was arrested on July 2016. He was indicted on August 2nd, so he basically stayed almost 3 weeks in jail without any charge for social media activity, which is kind of a little bit disturbing as it is. But then there were 2 decisions by an Israeli military court judge, the last one in November 8th, to release him. And unfortunately, he's still in jail because of what is called administrative detention. Administrative detention is a practice that Israel uses to keep Palestinians in jail without charges. And this is really disturbing. There's been a huge mobilization of international scientists. As you can see, this is a picture of our petition. We really hope that we can do something about it. This is a little bit off topic, but we think it's important since his family is really worried about his conditions for COVID. He has five daughters, five kids. One of the older daughters is getting married on Christmas Day, and he might miss the wedding for silly things, and this should really happen. But anyway, so to learn more about this case and following up on the webinars, please get involved and email us or following our website on Facebook, our Instagram, and Twitter. And also, if you have specific questions for our speakers, of course, you can reach out to them as well. But you can also reach out to Scientists for Palestine directly, and we will make sure that we will follow up with the speakers. Without further ado, let me introduce very quickly our speakers today, which we are incredibly excited to have them here. The first one in alphabetical order is Dr. Mohammed Abu Aid, who is the Director General for Technical Development at the Palestinian Higher Council for Innovation. And he has a decades-long experience in leading innovation and research in Palestine. His research interests lie specifically in different disciplines of agriculture. Then we have Professor Joel Cuello, or Cuello, as the Filipino pronunciation, as he taught us a few days ago. He's a professor of biosystems engineering and director of the Global Initiative for Strategic Agricultural and Dry Lands at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona in the US. He's a globally recognized expert in the engineering of sustainable and biological and agricultural system. And he's been working to build collaborations with Palestine for over a decade. We then have Kevin Cohen from Austin, Texas. He's a 7-time startup veteran and CEO and founder of TechWrench Austin. Kevin is a recognized pioneer in the startup community, and he's been focusing part of his work on using innovation and technology to make it better, to change the world for the better. His first trip in the West Bank has been in 2018, and he's been building collaboration with Palestine ever since. And then Professor George Smith, who is an emeritus professor of biological sciences at the University of Missouri. Many of you might know that in 2018, he won the Chemistry Nobel Prize for this technology called the phage display, he has been pushing since the 70s. And as he likes to remind us every time that we talk about this, the fact that he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry does not make him a chemist. He remains a biologist. He has been supporting Palestine for many decades now, and his contributions are countless, but we'll be really looking forward to hear from him in a few minutes. So without further ado, I want to start right away with our wonderful webinar. I'll just tell you a few words about the format that will entail short presentations by each one of our speakers, and then we'll go straight into the question and answer session. We preferred to use not have people directly answering questions to our speakers. So if you wanna ask questions, you can either send the questions to the chat or write us on Facebook, or directly message Andy, who kindly changed his name on the participant as Q&A Andy, so you will not make a mistake for that. And then last but not least, I want to make just a small reminder that we usually, Scientists for Palestine is committed truly to have number one, prioritize on Palestinian voices, and also keep a gender balance in our webinars. This is coincidence. We had a lot of experts that could make it today, and we failed on both having a majority Palestinian and have a gender balance. We apologize for that, but we will make a better work and we'll do better in the future. And also, we unfortunately will focus solely on the West Bank now. But again, the expertise of our great speakers focus on that. But we will. We'll certainly keep our Gaza in our hearts, but we will focus also on discussions of similar kinds for Gaza. Okay, without any further ado, let's move to the first speakers of today, Professor Joel Cuello. You will start up the conversation, so and really lay out the idea behind this webinar. So can you take it on and start for our speakers, get them right into the meat of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Martoni, and good evening to most of you because you're in Europe or the Middle East, and good afternoon in the East Coast. Anyway, I'd like to thank Scientists for Palestine for this opportunity, and thank you, Dr. Martoni, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank my fellow panelists today who are eminent in their respective vocations. So I've been visiting the West Bank now for the last 12 years. And that was initiated through an invitation from the Palestine. And that was initiated through an invitation from the Palestine Polytechnic university, which is in Hebron. And so they kept inviting me back for teaching collaborations and research collaborations. But anyhow, I thought I'd begin the webinar and my presentation by showing you faces. So these are faces of young Palestinians. These are faces of young Palestinian scientists and engineers who have hopes and dreams, just like young scientists and engineers anywhere in the world. And their hopes and dreams are not just tied to their personal betterment or the betterment of their families, but really their hopes and dreams also lie in the desire to occupy the commanding heights of science and technology, to be able to participate and cooperate in the designing of solutions that we all need today to address the grand challenges that we're facing today as a planet. So that ranges from climate change to food security to environmental sustainability and so on and so forth. Now, regretfully, because of the situation in Palestine, many of them, or I would say even most of them, are inhibited or not able to participate in that noble endeavor. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us, scientists and engineers around the world, to be able to bring this issue to the fore and also to stand with them so that they also will be able to participate meaningfully and proactively in this global efforts of finding these innovative solutions. So one thing that the mainstream media has hardly covered is the energizing of science and the building of innovation technology ecosystems in Palestine. And of course, here we're focused on the West Bank, but really the principles we're going to be talking about here today equally apply to Gaza as well. And in reality, it applies to all emerging economies. So let's start with some basic definition and understanding of what an innovation ecosystem is. When everybody hears the words in ecosystem, they talk about, or what crops up in their mind is the natural ecosystem, which is a tropical rainforest ecosystem in Brazil, which is the Amazon rainforest. If you look closely at this forest, you will see the various ingredients that make up the rainforest. So you can refer to them as the actors of the rainforest, or even the stakeholders of the rainforest. You've got soil, you've got sunlight, you've got rain, temperature, humidity, habitats, and all of these determine really what species grow in that particular ecosystem in terms of plants and animals. And really, those species represent the innovation of the particular ecosystem. So with a tropical rainforest ecosystem, it's got its innovation, which are the rich variety of species that it produces and supports. So this is a perfect analogy for what we refer to as the technology innovation ecosystem. And when we talk about innovation ecosystem, Silicon Valley really is the archetype of that innovation ecosystem. It's the holy grail that every country, every economy on earth today is pursuing to be able to have their own native innovation ecosystem. Why? Because that's where value is created, and that is where the growth of the economy is sustained. And so when you look closely at the innovation ecosystem in Silicon Valley, you'll see that it's got various actors, including companies, universities, researchers, engineers, students, investors, government, research centers, global partners, and so on and so forth. And it's the cooperation, collaboration among them that result in the production of this rich variety of technology products and services. So now we see these two ecosystems here. With the science and technology ecosystem, it produces the technology products and services. So why does Palestine need an entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem? We can look at it from the supply and demand dynamic. So when it comes to the supply side, we know that the Palestinian government is investing in terms of improving education, their R&D capacity, their innovation readiness, and annually they produce graduates, both in the undergraduate level as well as the graduate level. But if you look at the demand side, and this is, of course, a direct function of the situation in Palestine, the number of local enterprises and even global companies are highly anemic. And so there's not a lot of enterprises that are available to hire the graduates that are being produced by the universities and academic institutions. And the unfortunate consequence of this, of course, is a significant brain drain out of the West Bank, and I presume as well, although I'm not that familiar with the Gaza Strip, out of the Gaza Strip perhaps as well. So this is the current situation, which is not desirable. And so how do we correct this? What would be the ideal situation to rectify this situation? So the way to do that is to boost the demand side. And that means, of course, having commercial research and development infrastructures, incentivizing local enterprises, and even welcoming global companies. Welcoming global companies is not that easy right now in the current situation of the West Bank. But ideally, this is what should happen. And this is what is happening in all emerging economies in the world today, where you have global partners and you have foreign direct investments as well. And so this constitutes the Palestine entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem that is desired. And the bedrock of this is composed of the government, private enterprises, as well as universities. So in establishing this ecosystem, what is essential or a prerequisite is public-private academic partnership. So that's partnerships among the government, the companies, and R&D universities and centers. And that's the recipe for producing this sustained value creation. And of course, in collaboration with global partners and investors. Now, in Palestine, the Palestine Higher Council for Innovation and Excellence is the umbrella government organization that has the mandate for facilitating this cooperation among government, companies, and universities. And our next speaker, Dr. Mohammed Abouid, will be talking about this at length. So back to the Silicon Valley innovation ecosystem, let's look at its architectural profile so that we understand it better. So again, the bedrock of this innovation ecosystem consists of the state government, local government, private companies, investors, universities, global partners. And then you've got these clusters that are produced. So you have semiconductor chips clusters, so that's represented by Intel and AMD. You've got software and internet clusters, you've got Google and Facebook, smart gadgets clusters such as Apple and Samsung, health and biomedical cluster, Amgen and Genentech and others. And of course, there are many, many companies that represent each one of these clusters. So the question now is, how would the Palestinian innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem look like? So it should look like this. But what are those clusters? So in the 12 years that I have been visiting the West Bank, in terms of my exposure and my readings, these are the clusters that I see existing in the West Bank, even though they're still in the emerging stage. So certainly you've got IT, you've got pharmaceuticals, and some pharmaceutical companies produce generic drugs that they sell domestically within the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and some in Arab countries as well. Certainly food processing and high value products, which is very much emerging. And it is in this cluster that I've had a privilege of collaborating with the Higher Council for Innovation and Excellence through Dr. Abouid. So the Higher Council has this initiative, which is the Palestine Joint Center of Excellence for Strategic Arid Land Food and Bioproduction. We call it SAFAB. And this is a collaboration among the government as represented by HCIE, by a university, Al-Quds Open University, and a private company, which is an animal feed manufacturing company called Aziza. So why, and I'm using this as an illustration just to drive home the point. So why animal feed? Well, in the West Bank, the consumption is at about 820,000 metric tons a year, and that represents about 348 million US dollars. Now, unfortunately, 68% of this animal feed consumed annually is imported. Mainly from Israel, and about 32% is locally produced. The problem is, just like the rest of the world, the price of animal feed is going up astronomically. And so to help farmers and to make this more economically sustainable, it really is incumbent upon the West Bank to be able to produce their own animal feed locally as much as possible. And that's where I come in, because one of my research expertise is on algae production in scalable photobioreactors. So these are original photobioreactors that we designed in my lab group at the University of Arizona. And so I was contacted by Dr. Mohammed here so that I can provide some capacity building or assistance in terms of how to grow algae. This, by the way, is Engineer Adnan Samara, who's the president of the Higher Council. So this represents the government component of the cooperation. The university is represented by Al-Quds Open University. This is Dr. Amr, who is the president of the university. And then the private component is provided by Aziza, which is the Palestinian feed manufacturer located in the northern part of the West Bank. And this is the facility that they own that we visited sometime last year. And back to the university partner, which is Al-Quds Open University. These are some interns from Berzit University, whom I was able to train last year. And this is headed up by Dr. Aziz Salameh, who's one of my colleagues there as well. Now, in order to make this commercial for the West Bank, there is a need for industrial parks or economic zones. And one example is the Jericho Agro-Industrial Park, which is already built in the Jordan Valley. And this is a project, of course, of the Palestinian government, but in cooperation with Japan, and I believe also in part with Jordan. And the locators here are Palestinian companies that then are able to sell their produce internationally. So this is the Jericho Agro-Industrial Park, and there's lots of room for expansion. And in future, we really envision quite a number of these industrial parks all over the West Bank. So this is one of the locators there. It's a company called Choice, and it's doing manufacturing of these wipes. And another company is Palolea, which is producing these food supplements based on leaves of olive trees for hypertension and diabetes. So there's innovation that is being incorporated in the manufacturing. One thing good about manufacturing is that they can employ more people, and the people's wages are higher compared with agriculture. So I tweaked this well-known stages for economic growth for a country by Rusto, which he formulated in the 1960s, and I thought it was really time to update it. And this is how I updated it. So every country begins with agriculture and mining. This is extractive industries and then manufacturing, but then innovation begins with the incorporation of research and development into manufacturing, and ultimately high-tech innovation, knowledge-based value creation. So this is the path for economic development that we witness today in emerging economies, including China, the Philippines, Vietnam, many other countries. And this is the same path of development, really, that the United States and other developed economies traversed in the 1800s and the 1900s. So we are aiming for this innovation ecosystem for Palestine. I'd like to end by sharing this photo that I took with this gentleman here, Omar Abdelatif. He's the founder and creative and managing director of Dragon Studios. He's making these really wonderful animations for children entertainment and education. And so this is a notice to the rest of the world that for the coming years, tons of innovation will be coming out of Palestine or straight out of Palestine. Thank you very much.
Joel, thank you so much for this presentation. It's fantastic. It really sets up the discussion. We have already received a few questions. We will not ask them already yet to the panelists. Again, our panelists will give us the first short presentations before, and then we'll eventually get to that. So, but the fact that we're not answering them, that does not mean that we haven't read them. So you keep on sending it to us, that we'll keep collecting them. Okay, great. So, Dr. Mohammed, I think I would like to ask you, to kind of, you are the real expert of the situation in Palestine. So you could give us a much clearer picture on what is the situation, what are the obstacles, and what are the future plans that are currently being pursued. please go ahead. And if you can tell us that, it would be great.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank all of you for joining us this webinar about building technology innovation ecosystem in Palestine. Also, my great thanks for scientists for Palestine and our respectable speakers sharing their experience to support and enhance our innovation ecosystem. It's my honor to participate and share with you the current status of innovation ecosystem in Palestine, which is expected to be a driver for sustainable economic growth in Palestine. My presentation will be including 4 themes.
Dr. Mohammed, if you could click on the starting the presentation, I think that would be...
Okay, first theme, it will be Palestine Technology Innovation Ecosystem. Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Mohammed, would it be possible to go in presentation mode? It's the little click on the bottom right.
Yeah.
No. Okay. The bottom right. Oh, okay. Let's go ahead.
Okay. Yes.
Perfect. That's great. That's great.
So the first theme will be Palestine Technology Innovation Ecosystem. Second, I will talk about political constraints. Third, progress have been made in innovation system and our future plan. Here, I would like to start to talk about some statistics related to economy and technology innovation system in Palestine, just to give you a general picture and a real orientation. You know, Palestine is a very small country. Is the total area around 6,000 kilometers square. Population open to last accounting around 1 million. Outside in diaspora living about 7 million. Illiteracy rate is now around 2.9%. It means that we are very well growing. Unemployment rate is very high, especially in Gaza. It reached about 41%, and in West Bank around 26%. Ground GDP in million US dollar. We have around 7.4 billions. Total value of import around 5 or 6. But the total export is less than 1 billion. It's 944. The number of researchers is around. Actually, this numbers is by Central Statistics Bureau have been made more than 5 years ago. The total number around 4,553. 40% of those are in scientific field. Education, we have around 16 universities, 18 university college, and 20 community college. A total expenditure on research and development is around 60, is very small, of course, is around 61 million US dollar, around 26% from this amount coming from external donors. So, as you know, after the wars on 1948 and 1967. Most of Palestinians were lost their homes and lands. So they started and decided to invest remarkably in human capital through education and building a career professionally. So we have many people very well educated and skilled. Since just only around 20 years ago, our academia, private sector, and civil community were started thinking and launching initiatives about innovation and entrepreneurship. So several initiatives about innovation and entrepreneurship have been made in Palestine. Many institutions and associations were established in different areas. The ecosystem players divided and categorized into 7 categories. First, government, which is responsible for regulation and policy. Education, producing training and skills our students. Finance, microfinance, private equity, seed funding, and venture capitals. Support organization, accelerator, incubators, centers, etc. Donors, bilateral and foundations, corporation, sponsorship and entrepreneurship, media, print, and web.
Dr. Mohammed, since we have another maybe 7 minutes, I just want to give you, I don't know how to say, it's a reminder that the presentation should, if you could try to finish within 7 minutes, that would be great.
Okay. It's the Palestinian entrepreneur ecosystem that have been by Silica Tech 5 years ago. It's describe over 7 categories of ecosystem. Next. From government, just 10 years ago, the government start paying additional interest and support for technology innovation. The government put the overall goal is building knowledge-based economy, which is expected from this to sustain growth of the economy, improve competitiveness, job creation, and increase access to global markets. In fact, national policy plan for science and technology is not existing yet. The main players from government sector is HCIE and PALSAT, which is academia, and Higher Council for Scientific Research. So from about HCIE, HCIE is the first government initiative established in July 2012 by presidential decree as the umbrella of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in Palestine. Why this?
Maybe click on the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, click on that. Great.
This I have to talk about the board of members. The important board of member of trustees for HCE is the high-level representatives. We have in the board representative from presidency office, prime minister offices, and ministries, 8 ministries related to innovation. All universities are represented in the board, private sector, and NGO, association, and union. So regarding the capabilities of national innovation ecosystem, The SWOT analysis shows the strengths and weakness from science and technology perspective. There is many strengths both could be enabling and enhancing the ecosystem in Palestine. Like establishment of science and technology bodies, abundance of highly educated, skilled, and trained people, high percentage of young in the population, political and leadership support for science and technology. But regarding the weakness, there is, as I mentioned, lack of national plan policy for science, technology, innovation system, weakness of coordination, overlapping with some institutions, and of course, brain drainage from Palestine to find the jobs outside. There is many weakness in the system have to working to improve or to treat this weakness. Second, for the time, I will go quick. Regarding the political constraint, there is many constraint and obstacle, as you know, imposed by Israeli occupation, which is affected all aspects of our life related to innovation system. There is many restrictions and limitation for import scientific equipment and chemicals due to security reasons. Also, they impose the restrictions in mobility inside, outside for researchers, especially mobility between West Bank and Gaza. Also, there is many restrictions imposed for international collaboration and running joint research program. As you know, the international experts denied the visa issues, and the permission to stay in Palestine is very limited. They giving them from week up to month. It's very difficult to stay enough time to have enough share their experience with Palestinian researchers. Also, okay.
We have 1 more minute. We have 1 more minute. For
one more minute. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Indirect, it's occupation, security, and certainty situation are decreased the opportunity to access to the international funds and invest in startups. Okay, for the last minute, I just will talk about the complex, which is our project complex of innovation and excellence system. This project will contain 3 main apartments. We will build 6 innovation excellence centers, and we also have entrepreneur oasis. The innovation excellence centers, they have agreed or direct contact with all researchers, research institutions and universities inside, outside. The excellence centers will provide and generate the technology for upgrading and for the benefit improving the competitiveness for industry. The main part of this complex, it will be administrative HCIE and innovation excellence support fund. They will be responsible for planning and policies, legislation and regulations, coordination, and international relations. This complex is we looking as the future for Palestine. It will be real tools to improve, to enhance our economy. It will be open the opportunity for entrepreneurs to serve or to realize their ideas and research for real business. Also, this complex through OSIS will be developed their ideas. We will provide the incubation, acceleration, and also all needed services in management their projects and doing some market research to help our entrepreneur. Of course, we will cooperate with finance, private equity, seed, venture, invest funds in Palestine, inside and outside. University in this side will have a very important role in training and upgrading the ideas and the skills for our entrepreneur. In conclusion, I look the international support is very crucial for this complex. The successful models in the international experiences, it's very highly appreciated to implementing in Palestine to benefit us how the right way to use the output from innovation and research to improve our economy. The last main thing that I would like to mention, it's a cluster technical committee or platform. We will establish this clusters technical platforms from researchers, academia, from all institutions in Palestine. Also, it's very welcome to benefit from international experts to join with us in the specific cluster, open their experience and interest. I think the national experience and international support will help us to reach our the main goal for improve sustainable growth economy in Palestine. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Mohammed. We'll go back to there's going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, particularly directed to you. If you can end the screen sharing, that'd be great, so that we can.
Okay.
Great. Well, next we'll have Kevin. So I know that you have had a lot of experience in well, maybe in contexts that are different a little bit with the West Bank, but we'll probably you will tell us a little bit about it, but maybe we can have time to discuss those things in the question and answer. But you have had a lot of experiences in starting up innovation and business entrepreneurship, like the ones that we're discussing, particularly also in parts of the world which are not the United States, but also in the United States. So you have a kind of a global vision that you can maybe connect and explain to us, so that, and especially particularly in the relevance of the stuff that we're discussing today.
That sounds great, Mario. Thank you for the opportunity. It's my honor to be here with you, and especially I'm the only engineer / entrepreneur on that's not the Scientists for Palestine. So thank you for allowing me to be here with you. I do want to share, as Mario is mentioning, you know, before COVID happened, in the 3 years beforehand, I was in 22 different countries during those 3 years, including getting to go to Palestine twice. And I'm going to kind of give you my sense of things. I have a vision of what's possible. I want to share some models that come from my own personal experience of being an entrepreneur for the last 26 years, as well as a visionary type that's gotten to spend a lot of time in all these different countries, and then be able to reflect on how is it we can work together to really shift the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem in Palestine, and create connectivity to other parts of the world that then create even more opportunity for Palestinian entrepreneurs and scientists. First off, as Mario mentioned, I've really been honored and enjoyed the time that I got to spend in Palestine, both 2 years ago in 2018, as well as in 2019. And it is only because of the virus that we got slowed down this year in 2020 for doing some of the follow-up work. There's been a bunch of follow-up virtual meetings and things like that. And Tech Ranch, my organization's gotten to work with several of the entrepreneurs that we met in 2019 virtually since then. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And, like I said, I'm honored to be here with you and excited about where we can take the conversation. I want to offer up my hometown, Austin, Texas, as a model to consider. So some of you might have heard that Oracle Corporation just yesterday announced that they're moving from Silicon Valley, their headquarters, to Austin. Also, Elon Musk just mentioned 2 weeks ago that he's moving to Austin. There's been a number of different organizations. When I did the slide originally, Forbes had said Austin's the next biggest boomtown. But as of this week, with Oracle making its announcement and Elon Musk making his announcement last week, I don't think there's any question. But in 1994, when I started my first company in Austin, Texas, I had actually gotten to work for a startup company that was a Steve Jobs startup company in the Bay Area before that. But I wanted to return to home. And I think that concept of home, how do we develop home and then connect home to the other parts of the world, is an important concept. I'm going to talk about Austin because, 26 years ago, no one would have given me the time of day if I told them how important home was to me as an entrepreneur. And I had access to Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley, as Joel mentioned earlier, is a really impressive place. There's things you can only do out there because of the history. But what I want to point to as a guy who decided, even though he had access to all of Silicon Valley because of my background, I wanted to come home. And I think that that concept is important for our conversation. There's an important quote that I want to set in an even further context that might not be visible from where we're at today. And I want to say that this is what I truly believe. This is what I get driven by. Science fiction writer William Gibson says, the future is already here, it's just not widely distributed yet. Well, the Kevin Coyne corollary to that is all the world's problems have already been solved. It's just a matter of connecting the entrepreneur with a solution to the market that has the problem. And I can give you examples of how we've done this in the case of we have entrepreneurs using Austin as kind of a crossroads. We have entrepreneurs out of South Australia that are taking on a disease called leishmaniasis in Ethiopia. And that connection, which is a very big cognitive leap, wouldn't have happened without a certain style of thinking. The question is, and since we only have a short amount of time today, I'm going to go quickly through these slides, but how do we get there? My example would first be one of the companies that we discovered in Mexico. And it's not from one of the big cities of Mexico. It's from a little town called San Luis Potosí, which compared to, you might expect something from Mexico City or Guadalajara or Monterrey, because that's where all the innovation in Mexico comes from, right? Not necessarily. The whole idea was how to build an innovation bridge to drive opportunity, how to, what we call the 4 verbs that we use are how to discover talent, develop talent, connect talent to opportunity, and help it scale. It's through these 4 ideas or these 4 verbs that we believe we can build an entrepreneurial ecosystem connected worldwide and go discover these solutions and then promote them. Now, I'll tie this to Palestine in a few slides. And like I said, we only have just a few minutes to really dig into this concept. But this is what's been driving me as the founder of Tech Ranch and my team, and then the teams that we have connected into our teams. It's this idea that we can together solve all the world's problems. And there's unique talent in Palestine that I got to meet in my last 2 trips that I can speak to, I can give you examples of that I think make this possible. A very simple model. I'm going to talk about capability, culture, connectivity, and opportunity. And these are the things that as we have more time to really talk about how to drive these things together, we can get into more depth around. First is capability. Now, in the case of Dr. Mohammed's presentation, we already see the base capability there. In the case of Austin, Texas, there was the University of Texas, which is a very prominent research university, MCC, which is a historical consortium that was built in the 90s for organizing around computer chips, and also an organization called Cimatech. These bases gave entrepreneurs like me, the early stage entrepreneur that I was in 1994, gave us a place to play off of. Now, I was a student at UT. I graduated from there, wanted to stay in Austin, can tell you the rest of the story as we develop it. But as Dr. Mohammed was pointing to, it's important to have the base organizations that we can draw upon. I'll tell you, in further development, we can go into more details about that, but let me hop to the next one. The second is culture. Peter Drucker, the management consultant, has said it this way: culture eats strategy for lunch. Now, the key thing about figuring out what is the culture in Palestine that we need to take and actually have that be, I have an expression that I say to entrepreneurs, this is what you want to feature. In the case of Austin and what made Austin, Austin, it's our, and I jokingly say this, but there's truth to it, it's our hippie musician culture that made this place the place it is. And, people might forget it, some of that, with Elon Musk and Oracle running around in Austin. But the truth is, entrepreneurs like me, even though we had access to the Silicon Valley, to full Silicon Valley, we wanted to come back because of this culture. Now, each city in the world has a different culture to tap into. And like I said, as we have time to further develop these ideas together, I can't tell you at this sitting that I can tell you exactly what the culture of Ramallah is, but I have a sense of it. And it's from that we take that culture, enhance it, and plug it into this global ecosystem. In Austin's case, it was, how do we get entrepreneurs working together? How do we actually make, entrepreneur, that hippie musician culture laid down the foundation for Austin's powerful culture now. Austin is really good at cross products, the health meets education or other areas like the cross products. That's also where this model, developed from. That, where did Kevin Coyne get this idea of this model about connecting ecosystems? It comes directly out of, I'm a product of the culture of Austin. In the case of Lithuania, as an example, I was in the Baltics 3 times in the last, in that period of time. I was mentioning twice during Lithuania. The isolation that Lithuania faced in the Soviet era is what gave them access to create market dominance in the medical laser market, the femto laser market. All I want to say about this is the constraint drove innovation. And it's a matter of figuring out what is the innovation that's there. What's the soil samples that we need to figure out how to push forward. Obviously, the next thing is connectivity. It was only by chance in 1994 that my first customer happened to be a country away. I got lucky, but it's because of this getting lucky with selling very advanced database software into Mexico before I even had an American US-based customer, that TechRant just gone off and said, hey, we're going to start building bridges with all these different locations around the world, because this is how we can take really advanced startup technologies and entrepreneurs that might not be able to drive into these other markets directly to create opportunity. And, again, opportunity, there's a conference called South by Southwest. It implies the crossroads between 2 different locations. The main thing about it is, I'll just say that this is the key concept. How is it that we create crossroads with each other? How do we create what we're calling solution cities? And I'd like to have Palestine be one of the solution cities. In fact, perhaps the national complex that Dr. Mohammed was just talking about would be an example of this. Now, on my previous visit, I got to look at these different locations, actually even more. Saw some amazing talent, like in the Madgery example. This startup is driving. They have virtual driving software, applied AI for doing to essentially help drive cars virtually. It was really impressive. It shows that Palestine is already doing the top of innovation in this area of software. I know that this is possible. The key thing that we need to do is take this capability, create make sure we recognize the right cultural pieces around it, create the connectivity to create worldwide opportunity. That's the key thing that I'd like to say. I look forward to telling you more about this and talking further. One of the final things I'd like saying is, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, let's go together. And so let's go far together. With that, thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to taking your questions and working with you into the future.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I want to now to finish the first round of presentations and then start getting into more questions. Get to possibly the most prominent of our speakers, just because of it's hard to beat a Nobel Prize. George, you have plenty of experience, particularly on the academic side of things, and how university play a role in quote unquote development. And also we would love to hear your own vision of what innovation is, and particularly in the context of Palestine. Take it from here, George. We cannot hear you at the moment. I don't know if you're talking about that. We cannot hear.
Unmute. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really an amateur here because like most of the others here, I'm an academic, not really involved in commercial technology, but I have been impressed by a number of things that I've noticed about Palestine. And one thing is, it was emphasized by Dr. Mohammed, was the extraordinarily high rate of literacy in Palestine. Like the illiteracy rate of 2.9%, I would imagine that is lower than our own in the United States. And as I think any scientist that has any experience with Palestine at all knows that the numeracy level in Palestine is extraordinary as well. That Palestinians are, Palestinian culture is really excellent at mathematics, at theoretical physics, things that don't involve like big machines and so on. This is the first page of the most recent issue of the Palestine Journal of Mathematics. I have no idea what this means, but it's just to indicate that this is one aspect of technology that Palestine really already excels at. And of course, Mario has already emphasized that. So another thing that's impressed me is that Palestine actually seems to be a leader in the area of permaculture. This is farming. This is using the land in a way that is permanent, makes a sustainable kind of agriculture. This is from the Marda permaculture farm. It lives right just north of the settlement of Ariel, which looks down on it from a huge ridge. Here's its founder next to an extraordinary olive tree. There are several of these permaculture farms which aim to farm in a way that is sustainable and it does nothing to the land. This seems to be a really promising industry for Palestine. Here's another thing that's impressed me. This is Dr. Tarek Loubani, who's a Canadian doctor, and he's been involved as a doctor in Gaza, for example, during the Great March of Return. And he's the founder of the GLIA project, which now has many, many people in Palestine. And the idea here is to use really simple materials that are widely available to make devices that are otherwise really expensive, like that stethoscope that he's wearing. So that's a stethoscope that costs about $2 or so, and a regular one costs, I know, several $100s. And so this is made with 3D printers. Israel doesn't allow 3D printers to go into Palestine. So they made one in Palestine and then used it to manufacture other 3D printers. So this is just like using just innovation and your wits to create an industry within extraordinary constraints that can be a sort of a model for success that does not require high-tech, elaborate equipment from overseas. Here's another example, Mad Shahari's green cake. She's an engineer that used abundant natural resources in Gaza, that is rubble and ashes, to make green bricks. There's construction materials in the background. So this is an extraordinarily innovative and just imaginative way to use what's available to make something that is absolutely needed desperately in the Gaza Strip, building materials. She's a very innovative person. She's also started a company called Sunbox for making really cheap solar energy available to families for a very small fraction of the cost of electricity and other ways. These seem to me really models for just a modest infrastructure that can make a really big difference in the country. So the last thing I want to talk about is academic infrastructure. So I'm a life scientist, and in our university, at the University of Missouri, the life science is supported by a number of what we call core facilities. So this would be like academic infrastructure. This would be like our research parks, you might say. So one core, academic infrastructure for life science is the DNA core, which does a number of things. One is it has regular Sanger DNA sequencing devices, so that makes it really cheap for anyone in the community, and also for surrounding areas like colleges and so on, to submit samples and for a few dollars get a DNA sequence out of it. They maintain a enzyme freezer program. We don't manufacture our own enzymes and other biological research supplies, but if it was necessary, we could do that. And there's a Lithuanian company called Fermentas that during the Soviet era manufactured these enzymes that were unavailable in the Soviet Union from the West, and it became a really prominent company that was bought out for many billions of dollars recently. Next gen sequencing is DNA sequencing where you sequence like 100 million sequences all at once, and it requires a huge amount of data processing. The data from those machines last a few nanoseconds before they have to be thrown away, and that brings us to the bioinformatics core, which is a core that processes data, especially, for example, those huge amounts of data from next-gen sequencing. And this is something that Palestine would surely be able to excel at. I'm just going to mention one more core before we go. This is the molecular cytology core, which uses light microscopy that looks for images by interference contrast and by fluorescence microscopy to make really important discoveries about how cells work. This is a key core. There's a number of other cores. I'm just going to zip through, just go to the last one, which is our plant transformation core. This would be a tall order for Palestine at the present time, but it would be. This is something that Palestine also could really excel at. And I would just like to make one last comment, and that is the most important thing for Palestine's academic and its technology and innovation ecology is liberation. That is the overwhelming #1 need. This is something that I think everyone that wishes Palestine well needs to get behind. Liberation from the constraints that previous speakers have talked about that Israel imposes on all aspects of Palestinian culture, including its technology and innovation culture. So thank you.
Thank you so much, George. So we had a lot of different perspectives and speakers and a lot of different material. With that, I would, first of all, thank again all our 4 speakers, and then officially start the question and answer session. We'll try to get as many questions as possible to keep our goal is to keep our webinar within an hour and a half. So we probably have about 30 minutes, and we'll ask all the speakers to answer the questions in 1 or 2 minutes, so we can go through many different subjects. So to start, there was an initial question that I would direct to Dr. Mohammed, and but then I would also like to hear all the other speakers on this, because it's really something that is the core of this, and it's the question of whether or not we fear that even if we are in developing an innovation ecosystem, there is the kind of the political difficulties and the ongoing occupation could really modify radically our programs. So what is the impact? Really, we fear that the impact of Israel and its policies might anyway defeat our attempts.
Maybe I not heard you very well, but as I understood from your question, you answering me about the occupation impact.
Yeah, and specifically whether or not you fear that there might be, that any initiatives that we could take might be impeded by the presence of the occupation.
To minimize impact of occupation. Excuse me, I not hear you very well.
Yes, so whether or not there is a fear that the occupation might not allow real innovation.
May I translate?
Okay, we have to survive. My answering, we have to survive, and we have never stopped for any constraint imposed. So we have always to try, and I think the solidarity and support from international research colleague and institution and government will minimize the negative impact for development or technology transfer to Palestine. So I think also now the technology maybe emphasize, facilitate to exchange many experience in spite of the closures and borders putting from Israel. I think we have no choice, just we have to go forward. Our vision is to go forward, to adopt the technology and to open the opportunity for researchers and academia to be alignment with advanced technology at the world and to be a part of the progress doing the all international institutions. What if I answer you right? It's
Great. No, you certainly answered the question. So I want to also get Joel, who is really vision of this, and I would like to hear your perspective, and then I will have a question for Kevin on a slightly different topic.
Right. So, Mario, the current restrictions right now mainly are on the commercialization aspects of innovation and technology within the West Bank. I can't speak about the Gaza Strip because I'm not familiar with that, but I can speak about the West Bank. So, for instance, a lot of heavy industry manufacturing and lightweight industry manufacturing are prohibited from being performed in the West Bank. So you're not going to see factories in the West Bank that make electronic chips or computers and all of these things. That's prohibited by Israel. And so that's a big constraint. Industrial park, the Jericho Agro-Industrial Park that I shared in my introductory presentation, that is focused mainly on food products and basic necessities. And that, again, was mediated by the Japanese government. And of course, that was negotiated as well, not just with Palestine, but also with Israel. So that has the approval of Israel, and so that's not in any jeopardy in terms of being torn down. And that's the facility in the West Bank that I'm aware of where international commerce is allowed. That is through the Jordan border instead of through the Israeli border. So that's the big constraint. And going forward in the future, in terms of negotiations, between Palestine and Israel, this really needs to be at the forefront of that negotiation, is to allow for innovation and economic advancement and development in the West Bank, making it globally connected, so that there could be international trade that can be engaged in by the Palestinians located in the West Bank, and by extension also in the Gaza Strip.
Great, Joel. So I want to get Kevin on a slightly different topic, and then I want to get back to the same questions to George and hear his perspective. But before Kevin, we get a questions that said, I'll read it to you. As a metaphor, the innovation ecosystem can highlight locally available resources, interdependencies, and cooperative relationship within various areas of the West Bank. Israel restricts Palestinian experts to avoid competition. So why emphasizes competitiveness and competing in the context of the West Bank against whom and for what?
Wait, the second part of the question, you said why emphasize the competitiveness? Say more about that.
Yeah, in this, so this is not my question, but I believe that is the question of why do you think the model based on competition? I'm guessing.
Yeah,
it's a good model rather than a model based I don't know, alternative models.
Let me try to answer that question, at least my understanding of the question. And if the questioner would like to post a refinement on it, just let me know if I missed the mark on this. One of the dirty little secrets of the United States is everyone acts like competitiveness is what made this country strong, and it's really not. It's collaboration. It's cooperation. Since I'm from this part of Texas and I have family here that are from the last 5 generations at least that we know of, right? One of the metaphors that I brought to Austin that I'd always talk about in Austin is, is this idea. And one of the things that I think, being one of the long-term ecosystem developers of this place, is this idea that cooperation is more valuable than competition. Now we need to make sure, because we're now exposed to the global market, that we're competitive. But one of the things that I think can happen, and this is one of the things that made Austin over the last 24 years or 25 years that I've been watching it, is getting groups of people to work together. That example I gave from Lithuania, because I got to visit Lithuania and really dig into what happened in the ecosystem there. How is it that a group of people, took some classes, a couple of PhDs took some classes in Poland to study lasers, and then in a few short decades later, they own the market? Like this little country of 4 million people or so own the market. How 65% of a market. The key idea is they got really good because of the external constraint to cooperate with each other. And there's this whole ecosystem, this whole industry around that example. I think the same is true for Palestine. I'm not going to tell you, out of everyone that's speaking today, I know the least about Palestine. I know that to be true. I have a perception. I have some ideas about how we actually create this type of environment. But when the early stage firms who can be the swiftest, nothing against the large corporations, nothing against the universities, the early stage firms have the most capability to maneuver more than anyone else in the market. And because of that, if you can set up the field of cooperation among the most maneuverable groups, you can do really interesting things. We have examples in Austin. We have examples in Vilnius, Lithuania. And I'm sure the example that I pointed to earlier about imagery is a great example that I discovered on this last trip to Palestine.
Great, Kevin, thank you so much. So I want to get also George on the question that is a slightly different but similar on the topic that the previous questions that I asked Joel and Mohammed. And you visited, George, you visited Palestine in not long ago, like in 2019, and you met with various people in various universities and discussing basically what the specificity of the academic situation in Palestine. And I wanted to ask you whether or not you have learned about specific things that relate and that might be in the way and in developing the type of ideas that we kind of discussing in this webinar. And if so, what are the ways around it, if you had any idea about it?
There are countless blockages that the Israeli occupation imposes on academic life in Palestine. So one is making it extraordinarily difficult for foreigners to come to Palestine to work. Also, the other way around, the checkpoints and other impediments to free travel within Palestine, meaning that the universities really have to focus on just a very local population instead of a sort of Palestine-wide, like West Bank-wide studentship. The ordinary, I've made a lot of connections with the chemistry department at Birzeit University. Just ordinary chemicals like acids for their chem labs, I mean, that Israel didn't permit that. And also very few, I mean, there are many restrictions on equipment coming in from foreign sources. Israel imposes a kind of tariff or tax on things that are imported into Palestine. I think that means things that don't come from Israel itself, because they would really like to dominate the market themselves. These are all things that are just, I mean, these are unimaginable impediments from the point of view of an American university. And I should just point out that our country, the United States, it supports Israel, puts no pressure on Israel to remove these barriers. It is just, it's atrocious that we allow our country to do this. And that's, I think, one of the big tasks for American scientists is to start putting pressure on our own country to put pressure on Israel to stop this practice. We scientists, after all, are privileged and very influential constituency in our country, and that I think is something that we should really prioritize if we have any ambition to help Palestine. It, as I said before, what it overwhelmingly needs above all else is liberation.
Thanks, George. So I want to go back to Joel discussing the initial ecosystem, and then after that, Dr. Mohammed, there is a question for you. Joel, you have a specific vision, and in this webinar, there's plenty, there's people from the West Bank and the Middle East, but also many internationals. And so the question I would like to ask you is, what can international scientists do practically to help building in this vision?
All right. Right. Thank you, Mario. So one is in terms of capacity building. So certainly scientists, engineers overseas, and this includes as well the overseas Palestinians, for them to be connected with the scientists and the engineers at universities and government labs in Palestine, to be connected with them and having cooperation in terms of research and teaching. That is a big help to Palestine. But in addition to that, as Dr. Muhammad in his presentation shared with us, the Higher Council is in the process of coming up with a blueprint essentially for their national innovation thrusts, which includes a national complex. And I understand that there will be 6 centers involved in that national complex. Certainly overseas Palestinians, as well as, scientists and engineers worldwide can help definitely in that effort, because there's a need for Palestine really to come up with a blueprint of its innovation ecosystem. And then ultimately, there's going to be a negotiation again between Palestine and Israel. And certainly scientists and engineers worldwide need to help the government of Palestine in terms of providing substance to that proposed innovation ecosystem, because that's the only way that peace can be made durable over the long term, is that if there is economic progress, I mean, not just in Israel, but also in Palestine. That's the recipe. Without that, it's going to be hard to have a durable peace. So it really is incumbent upon scientists and engineers worldwide to help the government in terms of coming up with that blueprint and having it implemented going forward.
Thanks, Joel. I want to remind our audience to keep submitting questions. We have a few more minutes for questions. So if you have a few more questions to ask, please submit it in the chat. So I want to go to Dr. Mohammed before going to Kevin. And again, I want to build more or less with on the things that Joel already said. And it's really, again, you are, Joel has really pushing the vision, but you are part of the governance of Palestine. So you really have an even better perspective of what the future plans are. And so, if you could elaborate on the visions that Joel has already discussed. And again, I'm giving you the opportunity of telling the audience what people could do to help.
Okay, thank you. Also, I absolutely agree with the concept suggested by my friend Joel. Is very fantastic and is very helpful for us. The international collaboration is very important for Palestine, even in the preparation and designing the system or ecosystem. I believe that the research joint program is very fruitful for our researcher. The investment government is very interesting and paying interest to investing in the talent, the people. I think it's very important for enhancing our technology ecosystem. We have some very well skilled people, but the international support and joining with us with some programs, it will be very essential to benefit our system. I think my question for audience, how to help Palestinian ecosystem, it's just to ask to your institutions or your governments to in the political levels to make push or pressure for Palestinian for Israel policies to minimize the closures and the restrictions for the technology transfer for Palestinian. Technology very essential for our realizing independence. Your support from all of your side is very important to help us to minimize this pressure. And finally, I would like you and all guidance for their interesting of to support Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Again, we have a few more questions before going to George. There's Kevin. Kevin, basically the questions that I'm going to ask now gets at the core of whether or not, in what ways, if you can be kind of a little bit concrete, how much the kind of the entrepreneurship model that works well in certain contexts can be exported in the context of the West Bank. And there's a specific thing that our follower was asking, and it's related to the fact that most of the thriving force that pushes the entrepreneurship word in the West, it's within people with 30, 20, late 20, 30, 40 years old. That really put the main motor, but the precarious life of the West Bank and the need of like being a family might prevent that availability to be there. So I don't know if you had any remark on the specific things and more broadly on the
so I'll give you I have two ideas to share. And again, my understanding is based on a couple of weeks on the ground plus a bunch of virtual follow-up calls. So I don't mean to make little of if anything I'm about to say, but I want to give you a couple of concepts. In the 90s, during the time that I really wanted to be back in Austin versus in Silicon Valley, my family was here, things like that. I wanted to be here. It again was a really bad time to start startups here. You couldn't get funding, you couldn't have access, you didn't have all the different, the state and federal government, the city government, they didn't care about entrepreneurs. They cared about the larger industry here, but they did not really think about, the guys like me at that earlier stage in my entrepreneurial career. The thing that we ended up having to do is a group of us of entrepreneurs bound together and built an organization. You could read a little bit about it because it was a peer-led organization. It was not, we didn't have any funding. We couldn't figure out how to get anyone to pay attention to us. The city of Austin at the time was resistant to even paying attention to having meetings with us. And what we did was we organized ourselves. Now the group is called Bootstrap Austin. We stopped running the group more than a decade ago, but it went from 12 people to 800 entrepreneurs. Everyone was an entrepreneur in that group, and it was peer-led. And we almost like you'd see an open source project working with each other in open source software is how we were interacting as entrepreneurs. The concept in open source, as an example, is all bugs are shallow if you have a great number of eyes, meaning if you have a lot of people looking at a piece of code, you can actually figure out what the constraint is and fix it. Same thing, same concept applied over here. That's the only reason that Austin, at least from my viewpoint, ever got to go anywhere, because it wasn't just and I encourage that because I think that style of thinking is something we do see in Silicon Valley, do see in Austin. But as I travel around the world, it's not that's not common knowledge. That's the first thing. The second thing is this: your average Silicon Valley entrepreneur, when he or she is trying to solve a problem and is up against some issue about getting to a customer or something like that, will give themselves at most a week to work on something. Your Austin counterpart, who's a little bit more laid back, probably is looking at 2 to 3 weeks to solve that same problem. One of the things that I've noticed in entrepreneurs around the world a lot of times, and I'm saying around like the 22 countries I went to, a lot of times the concept is, okay, I'm going to solve this problem over some period of months. There's a conceptual difference about how to take the risk and how to drive the risk that I would just point to, that we might want to look at how we could actually shift that to where the 30 to 40-year-old that you're pointing to, Mario, that we say, no, don't go risk everything. Don't risk the family. Don't risk all this other stuff. Let's create it so that there's a different point of entry, that you're entry market happens in a different way. In my case, I built skunkworks versus startups. What is a skunkworks? A skunkworks is you go to a large corporation and say, hey, you guys won't take this risk internally because you're just working on incremental innovation. Whereas me and my team will take this concept, like the whole way I got the example with the bank in Mexico. As I said to them, you guys are just going to be plodding along at 3% per year, and that's great, but we're going to open up a whole new world. That type of thinking, which really answering a question really quick is hard to explain all the details and nuance of. That's what we need to be doing with at least some small set of Palestinian entrepreneurs, because those are the opportunities with the safety net of the first part of my question, and then this entry point with the second part of what I'm saying. I think we can shift things. That's how we did it in Austin. That's how we've done it in other parts of the world as Tech Ranch. That's how I think that there's an answer that needs to be studied and engaged here.
Thanks, Kevin. This is great. So we're getting towards the end of the webinar. We have maybe another 5 to 10 minutes. So please, submit your questions, and I'll give all the speakers, by the way, before we end, 1 or 2 minutes for closing remarks. But before that, I want to go back to George. And George, they really, there's a question that is directly by our follower directed to you, and they really want to know if you had any idea on what concretely can be done to get involved in the many kind of community work and innovative work that you have mentioned. I know you know maybe a bit more about GLIA, but I don't know if you had any remark about it. So how do you get concretely involved in supporting the various innovation initiatives that you have outlined for us?
I've got to say that I have not been involved in any of these initiatives. I've just observed them. I was really impressed with a few of the initiatives that I mentioned in my talk, such as GLIA from Tarek Lubani, and Sunbox and Green Cake. So these are I really don't know how they came up with their ideas, but it seems that people seeing a problem, with a lot of people seeing a problem. I guess it was this idea that a bug is shallow if a lot of people are looking at it. Yes, I think that's the case with people in Palestine. They see many of them are seeing the same bug, like how do we get building materials in Gaza or electricity at night to read? And a few of them come up with a really great solution. I don't know if I have any personal advice on this.
Great, George. Thanks. And by the way, for everybody, you can follow up. If you're interested in any following up on any of the many subjects that we've discussed today, you can follow up with Scientists for Palestine. And it's not that we know all of that, and we're often in the same position as George, but we will do our best to connect to the right people. Okay, so then going towards the end, I wanna ask one more question to Dr. Mohammed, which is partly just one more comment that has been in the chat, and is the fact that maybe, and I don't know, again, maybe we're pushing outside of your expertise, but is the question of how much the education system, which is, we talked about university, we talked about the private sector, somewhat Kevin has hinted towards culture, which connects to a broader kind of a broader environment. And so in particular, we haven't discussed the education system prior to universities. So how much of that you think it's important? And at least our follower seems to be saying that the current education system in Palestine might not be extremely, it doesn't really incentivize critical thinking. Whether or not you agree, and if there's anything we can be doing about this.
Maybe I say regarding this question, Our education system has to be reviewing the many programs in education university have to be reviewed. We have to concentrate on the practical knowledge. The theoretical knowledge is very well educated in our university, but in the practical and management of knowledge, we have a weakness in this phases, which is more related to innovation. We need more practical and management for knowledge for our students. I think the international support and cooperation through the joining our student and exchange of students is very well helpful. Our education system. I think the culture to accept the innovation is starting to be more acceptable and more important for our young people, especially students and researchers. I think we have to review our education program, especially related to practices and management of our theoretical knowledge.
Great. And I want to add that, maybe it's a point that was already being discussed, but in my own experience, having been in the West Bank, I do agree completely with what George said in the beginning, that the education system might need improvement, but I was incredibly impressed by the ability, especially mathematics and theoretical physics, of Palestinian scientists. I mean, it's really remarkable. So we're getting towards, we passed the hour and a half, so we want to keep, our audience engaged. So we'll start with closing remarks. Kevin, I will give you first, maybe a minute or two to just really kind of synthesize what you think the audience should bring back home after the webinar.
That sounds great. Thank you. Well, first off, thank you very much for this opportunity today. I want to say something. There's a lot more that I'd love to actually share and what I see is possible. One of the things that actually I discovered while I was in Palestine that I did not know was that more than half a million diaspora Palestinians live in the country of Chile. Now, why is that important? Well, if you look at Santiago de Chile, over the last 15 years, that Santiago wasn't even listed in most entrepreneurial cities in the world, and it got into the top 20 over the last few years. Well, in 2003, you might say, why do I care about Chile? What's important about these closing remarks? 2003, when I started TechRanch, actually I started the first organization behind TechRanch. The first project we did, and the first 1,000 entrepreneurs to go through one of our programs were actually in Chile. I was kind of seen as years later, the government of Chile launched a program called Startup Chile in 2010, but I was there in 2003, and I'm sometimes seen as the proto-entrepreneur of what was to become. Now I was spending my own money to do this work, but the idea was we discovered that part of what was happening when I point to this notion of culture in the Chilean discourse about entrepreneurship was the hero of the culture was the PhD who was going to go work at Citibank. And I'm nothing against PhDs, especially to my esteemed panel, by the way. But if the entrepreneur, if the person went to go become an entrepreneur, they were actually looked down upon. It was the word in Spanish is pequeños y medianos empresas. That means pymes is the way that they say it. And they'd be like, oh, your father couldn't get a real job. He works for a pyme. There was this understanding that was not totally conscious to everybody about a story that was blocking entrepreneurship. But now, all these years later, I just want to point and say Santiago is in the top 20. The thing that we need to look at as we work together and as we connect Palestine to other parts of the world are what are the stories that even given the constraints, and I am not saying anything about I saw some of the stuff that was getting in the way about the reality. But the thing that I want to point to is, as we connect even more in the world, let's take on those stories. Let's figure out what they are. We'll start with a group, small group of entrepreneurs to do that at the next level. But I'm excited about the possibilities, and I'm happy to be a partner with you guys in this conversation. Thank you for this opportunity today.
Thanks, Kevin. That was wonderful. I want to go and then to George. What are your takes, and what do you think our audience should take away from this webinar?
Well, really just emphasizing points that we've already made. First, there's absolutely nothing wrong with Palestinian culture. They are just as able or more able than other cultures. It's a storied, an old, and a very able culture. Both poetry, art, and science, especially mathematics and like physics, things like that. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have nothing to tell them. But we do have something to tell our own governments, that we need to do to pressure our own governments to force Israel to remove the impediments that have had the effect of lopping off this branch, this valuable branch of worldwide culture from the place that it should take in the culture of the world at large.
Thank you, George. This is very valuable, really. And Dr. Mohammed, you, what are your closing remarks? I mean, you certainly have much to say, given that you are the only one at the moment among speakers in the West Bank. But please go ahead. We really want to hear what you think is.
Okay, thank you for all. If you let me, my final message or a request from all of you who's support Palestinian people. The political situation is very difficult now. To be more closely to our independence, I think your support in investment in our international cooperation program, it will be very benefited for Palestine. Also, your integration and investing in our people through exchange program will improve our capability to building our innovation ecosystem. Finally, I would like to thank all of your support to Palestinian people, and maybe we will arrange another webinar to build or to build a roadmap for all international institutions, what they practically could help in the building and enhancing our technology innovation system in the next future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. Joel, you are really the one that had the vision, and so I think it's fair to ask you to have the last closing remarks, and then I will just give a few more information to how to get involved, and we'll close. Joel,
thank you. Thank you. So as human beings, it's a real privilege to be alive in this early part of the 21st century because we're living in a globalized economy, and this is the age of innovation or value creation. In fact, somebody said that we're now living in the fourth industrial revolution, which is the convergence of the physical, the digital, and the biological. It's a real exciting period in history to be alive and to participate in this innovation endeavor that is global. And every people, every nation has a basic human right to be able to participate in this human endeavor to advance not just the economy, but to advance value and innovation toward solving some of the grand challenges really that we're facing as a planet. You know, like climate change and food security and environmental sustainability. All these big problems cannot be solved by just one people, one nation. Every one of us has to be part of this, and that includes the Palestinian people as well. They have a lot to contribute. They have much to contribute, and everybody has this right to be able to participate meaningfully and productively in this planetary and corporate endeavor. So that's what we're working toward, and that's what we're wishing everybody on the planet to be able to engage in and participate in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joel. This is truly the best way of closing this. As Dr. Mohammed mentioned, this is just the beginning of a long conversation. Of course, such ambitious initiatives like the really building ecosystem and pushing Palestinian innovation does not happen in an hour and a half. It takes much longer. And so the whole point is to try to get involved. Scientists for Palestine will play its role as much as it can, but of course we will also try to connect with as many partners internationally and within Palestine as possible. So I want to close with just reminding you how to get involved in Scientists for Palestine. Here it is, our email address, our website, that we are on Facebook. So with that, I want to thank extremely once more our incredible panelists. I want to also extend a thank to Madalena Lemos and Andy O'Bannon, who are professors in the UK, and yet they're helping us in running the webinar, and all the audience and everybody that has followed us today, this morning, this evening, or this afternoon, wherever in the world you are. We'll be in touch soon with a follow-up webinar on this topic and the many topics that Scientists for Palestine brings forward. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, morning, or afternoon.